A single tear from the girl fell and turned into a priceless pearl. Countless men fell madly in love with her because of it, but not one of them lived to see the next morning. The girl carried a deadly curse. Any man who fell in love with her had his heart beat wildly until it gave out. But fate played its gentlest trick on her. A lonely man with nowhere left to turn became the one exception in her life. His name was Nick. That day, he was wandering around like he always did. When he turned around, he found a mermaid lying on the shore. In his panic, he had no improper thoughts at all. He immediately took off his coat and covered her with it. He leaned down to listen to her breathing and found it was so faint it was almost gone. Nick knew that if he did nothing, she would die. He picked her up and rushed to the hospital. But the mermaid was much heavier than he had expected. He desperately tried to flag down a car, but when drivers saw an unconscious woman, they were afraid of getting involved. One after another, they all refused to help. Without hesitation, Nick pulled out his money and bought a three-wheeled bike. When they reached the hospital, the doctor quickly began examining her. But at that moment, the mermaid suddenly woke up. The instant she saw an unfamiliar man approaching, she instinctively began singing her deadly song. Her voice flowed like water and sounded almost heavenly. Anyone who heard it fell under her spell. The next second, a sharp pain struck his chest. He stumbled into the emergency room. Not long after, he collapsed and never woke up again. Nick had no idea that disaster was already closing in. Without any identification, he was turned away by the hospital. So he carried the mermaid back to his home. The landlady next door quietly watched everything. Back at home, Nick gently placed her in the bathtub. He draped a t-shirt over her and poured water over her, hoping to wake her up. The girl opened her eyes and found herself in a strange place. A man whose intentions she did not know stood beside her. She sang her deadly song again. But Nick was completely unharmed. He even thought she was flirting with him. He happily started talking to her and offered her something to eat. Then he turned and went into the kitchen. Ella wanted to escape. But when she looked down and saw the deep wound on her tail, she knew she did not have the strength to go anywhere. She grabbed a duck and bit into it. Unfortunately, it was not food. Nick returned with dinner. He noticed the blue blood on her tail. He brought over bandages and carefully approached her. Ella sang once more. But Nick simply hummed along with her melody. At that moment, the fear in her eyes finally began to fade. For the first time, she willingly told him her name. Just then, she started coughing violently. Nick handed her some food. She instinctively resisted human food. But under his gentle yet determined gaze, she finally took a bite. To her surprise, it tasted pretty good. But her eyes soon grew dim. She told him that she had to return to the sea before the third sunrise. Otherwise, she would die. Nick felt sorry for her wound and even more for the person she was. He promised that he would take her back before the third day. Meanwhile, the doctor who had collapsed did not survive. His wife and found the book Nick had left behind. She also discovered a strange streak of blue blood outside the hospital. She swore that she would uncover the truth. At the same time, the landlady warmly chatted with Ella. She told her Nick's story. He was a man who had been deeply hurt by love. After his mother died, he seemed to fall into a black hole. His family's bar was on the verge of closing. He shut himself off from the world. The landlady told Ella that she was the one who had brought him back to life. Ella was deeply moved. Out of curiosity, she lit a cigarette. In the confusion, she knocked over a bottle of perfume. Within seconds, the room burst into flames. When Nick rushed home, almost everything had burned down. Ella was nowhere to be seen. He finally found her hiding under the bed in a dark corner. Her eyes were filled with fear. Nick did not say a single word of blame. He simply picked her up and carried her to the landlady's bathroom. When he returned to the charred room, everything he loved was gone. The figures he had made by hand and his favorite instrument had all been destroyed. He tripped over the pearls on the floor. They were the tears Ella had cried. Nick went to see Ella again. Like a child who knew she had done something wrong, she promised she would never smoke again. Nick suddenly smiled. Maybe all of this had been meant to happen. The third day was drawing closer. Nick took out his ukulele and they played music together. Sunlight streamed into the room as the notes flowed like water. For the first time in a long while, the light returned to Nick's eyes. He found himself moving closer to her. Just as the moment became perfect, a recorded message interrupted them. But Ella's smile said everything. She had not rejected him. In the very next second, Nick felt a sharp pain in his chest. Ella knew he had fallen in love with her. That night, a party began at the Flower Bar. Nick invited Ella to go with him. He told her that after the party, he would take her back to the sea. Meanwhile, and received the blood test results. The blood belonged to an unknown marine creature. When she connected that to the recent mermaid reports, a bold conclusion emerged. The creature that killed her husband was a mermaid whose song could kill. Her desire for revenge burst into flames. On the night of the party, the landlady dressed Ella in a beautiful gown. She applied elegant makeup and trimmed her nails. The old three-wheeled bike carried two people in love toward the bar. In front rode a gentleman with a French flair. Behind him sat the only mermaid he would ever love. The moment Nick's father saw Ella, he liked her instantly. He personally held a ceremony to celebrate their love. As confetti fell, the walls around Nick's heart finally came down. Ella opened up to him at last. Her people had been hunted by humans since the beginning of time. Her mother had been killed by a blade. She was the only survivor. She had used her voice to lure countless sailors to the bottom of the sea. But Nick was the only man who had never been affected by her song. They danced beneath the warm, dim lights. Their hearts moved closer and closer together. But joy never lasted forever. The time to say goodbye had arrived. Nick carried her out of the bar. They smiled at each other beneath the lights of the Eiffel Tower. They said very little, but they understood everything. They went to the aquarium. Ella dove into the water as if she had returned home. Without hesitation, Nick jumped in after her. They played together in the water like two fish in love. But when their feelings reached their peak, Nick's heart was torn by pain once again. He was on the verge of suffocation. Without hesitation, Ella kissed him and gave him a breath of air. Nick survived. The next morning finally arrived. Nick took her back to the place where they had first met. He begged her to stay. Tears filled Ella's eyes, but she could not say a word. He brought her home one last time to show her a final surprise. It was not a real fish. It was an animated film about a fish and a human. Every frame reflected the two of them. Ella cried. She was terrified that she would drag Nick to his death. So she lied to him. She said she wanted a real fish. Nick believed her and rushed out to find one. The moment he turned away, Ella's tears finally overflowed. One by one, they fell to the floor and turned into dazzling pearls. Legend said that when a mermaid cried for love, her tears became pearls. And her life faded away with them. She had to leave. When Nick returned carrying a large fish, Ella was gone, and was standing there in her place. She told him that he had only been hypnotized. If he continued like this, he would die just like her husband. Nick refused to believe her. Overwhelmed by emotion, he collapsed to the ground and took Ella to her laboratory. She coldly drew her blood. When Ella woke up, her first words were a plea for and not to hurt Nick. At the critical moment, the landlady arrived. Disguised, she distracted Anne and woke Nick up. Nick dragged the bathtub and raced toward the shore like a madman. That day was the third sunrise. At dawn, they finally reached the sea. Nick carried her into the water step by step. As the water rose to his chest, he let go of all fear and hesitation. He held her tightly and kissed her. It was their first kiss and also their last. Then he released her with his own hands. Like a sea spirit, Ella slipped into the deep ocean. She turned back to look at him one last time. Then she disappeared into the endless blue forever. Nick collapsed unconscious on the shore in unbearable pain, and arrived and was about to act. But suddenly, she saw the image of her husband before her eyes. At that moment she finally understood, and she chose to save Nick. When Nick woke up, it felt as if a piece of his heart was missing. He sold all the pearls Ella had left behind. With the money, he bought a large ship and set sail across the vast ocean. He believed that somewhere out there she was waiting for him. Time would grow old, but the memories you left me would shine like a star that never faded from the night sky. May we each continue on our own journey, while keeping a light burning for one another in our hearts forever.